1883. Dry Creek, Colorado. A town that looked peeled back by the wind. Not old, but tired. Boards warped, roofs patched with mismatched tin. Church steeple leaning like it hadn't quite made up its mind to stand or fall. What trees there were bent eastward, as though bowing to the plain's long memory of grief. Marin stood in the doorway of what had been her husband's store. The windows were broken, paint peeled, the inside gutted like a rickyard. No one had touched it since the spring fall when his debts caught up with him in the form of two men with rings on their fingers and guns at their hips. They left him in the street. The town buried him, and then looked away. The wind kept to its endless whisper, stirring dust into the folds of her skirt. Her children, Hattie, 10, and James, barely 6, stood behind her, quiet. They hadn't spoken much since the ride west from Nebraska, except to ask when they'd eat, or if the train man was kind. She had no answer for kindness. Not lately. The morning air smelled like rust and earth. Far off, a hawk circled something not yet dead. Marin's hands, cracked and red, curled around the key in her pocket. One of the few things she had left. The other was the deed, which now meant very little, and a canvas sack of dry biscuits wrapped in a shawl that had belonged to her sister. She stepped inside. The boards groaned beneath her weight, and sunlight poured through the cracks like it meant to burn the past out of the place. Dust floated in the air as soft as ash. There was still a nail in the beam where the ledger used to hang. A broken stool in the corner. She remembered her husband's voice, thick with liquor, accusing her of holding him back, of being plain, of bearing him children when what he wanted was escape. She remembered the way the townspeople had stopped meeting her eyes after the third time she came for credit. She had a mind to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. It had been too many months of survival, of wrapping Hattie's feet in paper when her boots tore through, of sleeping upright on the train with James curled against her chest. Outside, a horse snorted. Hoofs scuffed against the hard pan. She turned. A man sat astride an all-black mare, wide-shouldered, coat dusty, hat pulled low. He didn't move right away. James crept closer to her, small fingers grabbing the edge of her skirt. The man dismounted, slow, like he was sore or polite, she couldn't tell which. He led the horse toward the post by the porch, tied it off, then stood still again. Not staring, just quiet, like someone watching weather roll in. "You more'n what?" His voice was low, shaped by gravel and smoke. She didn't nod. "Who's asking?" He took off his hat. His hair was dark, a little long, streaked with silver at the temples. His eyes were the kind that had seen war, though he looked younger than the wear he carried. "Name's Eli Cutter." That name meant nothing to her. He studied her, then looked down at the boy peeking from behind her skirt. "I knew your husband." "Not well." She waited. "I loaned him a mule team last year. He didn't bring him back." Her jaw tightened. Her hand found James's shoulder and held him close. "He is dead," she said flat. "You want money, you'll need to wait behind the bank, the butcher, and the Union Pacific." Eli Cutter didn't flinch. He set his hat against his thigh, fingers worrying the brim. "I'm not here for money." Hattie from the doorway finally spoke. Her voice was small. "Are you kind?" The man looked at her. A wind gust pushed grit down the street. "I'll show you," he said. Then he looked to Marin. "I have land," he said. "A spread northwest. It's empty but for me, and there's work to be done. I can't pay much, but I can fee. I came to find someone who might want a new start." Marin didn't answer. Her hands trembled. "I didn't come for charity," she said. "I didn't offer any." He stepped back from the porch and left her with silence. He swung back onto the horse with a grunt. "You'll be riding back past sundown," he said. "If you and your children want to come, pack light." If Nutty nodded once, no harm done. He touched the brim of his hat again, then turned the horse and rode off without looking back. James tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, are we going?" Marin looked at the broken glass inside the store, at the ledger nail, at the dust that still hadn't settled. Then she said, "We'll see." They walked north at sundown. Marin carried the shawl sack over one shoulder and held James's hand. Hattie followed, quiet but upright, her eyes fixed on the distance as though she already knew what she was heading into. The sun had dipped low enough to throw long shadows across the grass. The trail was faint, a twin set of ruts and scattered hoof marks that meandered out of Dry Creek and into land that didn't belong to anyone but God. Eli Cutter hadn't said how far. He hadn't said much at all. But Marin had been a farmer's daughter once, and a storekeeper's wife after that. She knew how to read a man's offer when it came without pleasantries. Either he meant to trick her, or he meant to test her. Either way, staying put meant starvation and something worse, the slow rot of spirit. She didn't know why she trusted him. Maybe it was the way he had paused before answering Hattie's question. Like it mattered. They walked until James's legs gave out, and then she carried him. The light was near gone when she saw a wooden cabin, half tucked against a slope, with the faintest smoke line curling from a chimney pipe. There was a barn to the side, slanted, and a fence that looked recently repaired. Emil stood inside it, ears twitching at the sound of them. Eli Cutter was on the porch, seated, coat off, sharpening a blade with a slow, even stroke. He stood when he saw them. Didn't smile, but didn't look surprised either. "You walked," he said. "We don't have a horse." He nodded once. "Supper's on." She hesitated. Hattie stepped forward first, brushing past her mother with that bold, fragile pride some girls grow to fast. Martin followed with James heavy on her hip. Inside, the house was small but clean. 2 rooms, a bed with a heavy quilt, a table already set with tin plates and a pot that smelled like beans on drabbing. She spotted a rifle near the door and a Bible on the sill. "Nothing fancy, just what you'd need to survive." I ain't got much," Eli said, ladling stew into bowls. "But you're welcome to what's here." Marin waited for the catch, for the glance, for the smirk. None came. He served the children first, then her, and only after they'd eaten half their food did he sit down and start on his own. They ate in silence, save for James slurping and Hattie's quick, embarrassed shush. Afterward, Marin helped wash the bowls in a tin basin while the children curled near the fire. She didn't ask where they were supposed to sleep, and he didn't offer until he saw her eyeing the warm bed. "I'll take the floor," he said. "You and the children take the mattress." "That ain't right," she said, though her feet ached from the miles and her back had started to hum with pain. "Still, how it's gonna be." Later, when the fire dimmed and the wind moaned low outside, she lay between her children and stared at the ceiling beams. She could hear Rella's breathing steady from the floor. No shift in his voice. No movement that made her skin crawl. Still, she didn't sleep. Cowlin. Her body was here, but her mind kept reaching back. To the man she'd married. To the look in his eyes the last time he came home with another debt and a bottle. The story of some scheme that would change it all. She remembered her father's voice, hard but warm, telling her never to trust a man who smiled when you're desperate. Smiles hid teeth. Eli Cutter hadn't smiled. In the middle of the night, James coughed in his sleep, and she covered him tighter with the quilt. She sat up, pulled the shawl around her shoulders, and walked barefoot to the window. The moon set low and orange on the horizon, swollen with dust. The land rolled in soft hills, open and indifferent, yet something in it made her chest take. Behind her, Eli stirred. "You all right?" he asked, voice rough from sleep. She didn't turn. Still figuring that out, he sat up. She could hear the creak of the floorboards, the shifting of his weight. "My wife's buried about a mile north," he said after a pause. "Caught fever last winter. No one made it in time." Marin swallowed. The silence thickened. "You got family?" he asked. She hesitated. "Used to." He nodded. "Me too." No more was said. She returned to bed. This time she slept. Not deep, not easy, but with the edge of something she hadn't felt in months. Not safety, but maybe the shape of it. Subscribe, and let the West keep teaching. The days took on rhythm. Not comfort, just rhythm. In the morning, Eli was already out in the yard, chopping wood or checking the fence line. Marin rose before the children, boiled coffee in a blackened tin pot, and stood by the window watching the sky warm from indigo to gold. Her hands still hurt, but in a way that felt honest. Not the hollow ache of worry, but the rawness of use. She began to work, quietly at first, sweeping the cabin, scrubbing out the corners, taking knives to the root vegetables Eli kept in the cellar, paring them down with careful fingers. She was cautious around him, but she noticed things, like how he spoke to the mule like it was an old friend, how he wiped his boots before coming in, how he said good night each evening soft and plain, before settling onto the floor. Hattie took to helping in the kitchen without being asked. James spent hours trailing the fence, pointing at birds and asking questions Eli never brushed off, even when the answers were slow in coming. It was kindness exactly. It was something quieter, steadier. One afternoon, she stood with Eli outside the barn, both of them watching as Hattie tried to stack hay with a fork almost her size. "She's stubborn," Marn said. "She's got reason to be." Eli leaned against the post. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt, and a bruise showed on his forearm where the mare had spooked and kicked. He didn't mention it. She only saw it when he rolled his sleeves. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Going somewhere not so hard?" He gave a dry breath that might be been a laugh. "Every day. But you stay." He nodded, thoughtful. "Someone's got to hold the line." She didn't ask what line. Not yet. That night the wind picked up. Mara cowed in sleep. She sat outside, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the land groan. Eli came out a few minutes later, handed her a second blanket, and didn't say a word. They sat together in the dark. After a while he said, "I had a son. Name was Daniel." She turned toward him. 10 years old, he said. "Brave, too brave." He looked down at his hands. "Drowned in the river. Spring thorn fast that year." Marin stared into the dirt. "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "I didn't talk to anyone for months after. Just kept to myself. Drank too much. Let the fields go." "What changed?" He took a while before answering. "I came across a woman on the road. Widow. Cart busted, 2 little ones hungry. She asked for help. I almost passed by." "But you didn't." "No, I didn't." She looked over at him. His profile in the dark was sharp worn. "You got a church?" she asked. He shook his head. "God and I have a long-standing disagreement." That made her almost smile. Later, when they went back inside, he paused by the hearth, eyes on the 2 children asleep in the bed. "They ask good questions," he said. "They've had to." That was how it went for a while. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady learning. Shared labor. The comfort of someone who worked beside you without making it a transaction. She started trusting him the day he let James help him with the tools, even though it slowed him down. And when he asked Hattie to read from the Bible at supper, even though she stammered and blushed, he was rough in manner. But he had this way of seeing people that made them stand up straighter. And slowly she found herself speaking more. About Nebraska. About her sister who died in childbirth. About the husband who gambled away their future before disappearing into a bottle. She didn't expect Eli to fix any of it. He never tried. He just listened. One day while they were mending the porch railing, she asked, "What do you want, really, out of all this?" He kept his eyes on the nail he was driving in. "Something that holds." She looked at him, then at the beam between them. The new wood against the old. It was a promise. Not yet, but it was something. The snow came early that year. By the middle of October, frost clung to the window panes each morning, and the ground stiffened underfoot. They split wood until their hands blistered. Eli built a second frame bed for the children, and Marn stitched blankets from old coats H.E.D. found boxed in the barn rafters. She had learned his routines by then, how he checked the traps before sunup, how he counted fence posts under his breath, how he touched the saddle horn 3 times before mounting, as if it were prayer. He never spoke of needing her. He just made space for her. That somehow was harder to ignore. One morning while rolling dough, she caught him watching her. Not like a man appraising a woman. Not like her husband used to do when he wanted something. Just watching. Like the sight of her doing something ordinary had struck him still. He looked away before she could speak. Later that day they dug a trench near the barn to run runoff. Eli worked shirtless in the pale sun, body lean and hard with muscle. Hattie helped, lugging buckets of gravel, proud and red-faced. James chased the chickens. When the shovel slipped and caught Ellie's shin, Marin ran for a cloth without thinking. She knelt in the dirt, wiping the blood, and he winced only a little. "You don't flinch," she said. "Not anymore." She looked up at him, close enough to see the lines fanning from his eyes. You should have remarried. I was looking for someone to bury next to. The words sat heavy between them. He stood, picked up the shovel, and kept working. That night she found herself lying awake again, heart thudding for reasons she didn't quite understand. Or maybe she did. The children had changed too. Hattie had a quiet steadiness now, shoulders squared with the pride of real work. James still asked questions, but now he waited for answers. He called Eli sir without being told. He followed him like a shadow. Mara noticed the way Eli slowed his stride when James trailed behind. How he let Hattie try on his hat. How, without saying so, H.E.D. started building a place for them all. One evening, when the fire was low and the wind was up again, Eli laid down his fork after supper and said, "There's a man coming." Martin stiffened. "Who?" "Name's Royce Craddock. He used to run horses with your husband. Word is H.E.S. been sniffing around Dry Creek, asking who took in the widow." Her stomach nodded. Why would he care? Could be H.E.S. owed something, or thinks he is. His voice was calm, but she saw the way his jaw danced, the kind of stillness a man wears when H.E.S. weighing his options. "You'll talk to him," she said. "No." She looked at him sharply. "I mean, you won't have to. He'll deal with it. I'm not yours to protect, Eli." He nodded. "But you're under my roof, and I don't take kindly to men who chase ghosts." She stared into the fire. "H.E.S. dangerous." "I've met dangerous." He stood and walked out onto the porch. Martin followed. The stars were sharp that night, sky hard and clear. She wrapped her arms around herself. "If he shows up," she said, "you won't shoot him outright, will you?" "No." Silence passed between them like breath. Then, softly, he said, "I didn't come to this place to die alone." She turned. His eyes held hers. "I don't want to lose what's been built here," he said, "even if I didn't know I was building it." The cold bit at her face, but inside, something had started to worm. She reached out just a little and touched his arm. He didn't move. "Then we face him," she said. "Together." He nodded once, not in agreement, in respect. It was the first time she'd said we unmeant it. Royce Craddock crowed in 2 days later, just after dawn. Eli saw the dust trail from the ridge and stepped off the porch slow, rifle slung but not raised. Martin stood behind the door with Hattie and James tucked close, a knife clutched behind her skirt. She had known Royce back in Nebraska, though only by reputation horse trader, fast talker, mean when cornered. The kind of man who looked at what was nailed down and figured it belonged to him. He reined in at the gate and leaned forward in the saddle, grinning like they'd all met for coffee. "How, Eli? You look like someone stole your dog." Eli didn't answer. Royce's eyes slid to the cabin. "I heard tell you got a woman up here. Widow of a man used to owe me a fair sum." Eli shifted his weight, one hand on the gate post. "What's your business?" Royce smiled, slow and crook. "Just come to collect what's mine. There's nothing here for you." "I think that's for me to decide." The silence after that was long. Martin's breath came shallow. She could see through the crack in the door. Royce's face gone colder, the air tight with menace. Then Eli said, calm as ever, "The woman and her children are under my roof. That makes them my concern." Royce spat into the dirt. "You don't scare me, Cutter." Eli took a step forward. "Good. I'm not trying to." Royce shifted in the saddle, hand near his coat. Then, seeing Eli hadn't moved toward his rifle, just stared him down with something steady and unreadable, he let out a huff. "You think Chef's worth it? That's rich." Eli smiled, just barely. "Chef's worth more than you'll ever touch." Royce narrowed his eyes. "You're gonna regret this." "No," Eli said, turning away. "But you might." Royce stared at his back, then turned the horse sharp, kicking up stones as he rode off. When the dust had settled, Eli came inside. Martin was still at the door, arms wrapped tight around James. "You didn't draw," she said, voice shaking. "Didn't need to. But if he comes back, he'll be ready." He walked past her, gentle, and knelt in front of Hattie. "You all right?" She nodded, jaw clenched hard. James asked, was he gonna hurt Mama? Eli looked at Martin and back at the boy. Not while I'm breathing. That night, the house was quieter than usual. Martin stood at the sink long after the dishes were done, staring out at the darkness pressing against the window. Eli joined her, close enough to feel the heat between them. "You put yourself at risk," she said. "So did you." "I didn't step outside." "No," he said, "but you stayed." She turned to face him. "You meant what you said, every word." "I'm not easy," she whispered. "I've been through things I don't talk about. I get quiet. I get tired. I won't always know how to do this." His hand came up, slow, and rested just above her elbow. "I'm not asking for easy," he said, "just honest." She studied him, every line of his face, every shadow. Then she leaned into his chest and let herself be still. Not weak, not safe, just held. By November, the snow came thick and steady. It covered the broken fence lines and softened the gray markers out behind the barn, where Eli had carved his wife's name into a stone, with nothing but a chisel and grate. The world turned quiet in winter. Footsteps muffled, air sharpened. Everything felt closer. Mar moved through the cabin with ease now, her body remembering the rhythm of hearth and needle, the way a hand steadied a pot when the wind howled against the shutters. The children had their chores. James fed the hens. Hattie chopped kindling, and they did them without coaxing. One morning Eli took her with him to the far pasture. A wire had come loose, and the post had split. They rode in silence, and she found she liked that about him. He never filled the air with noise. He made room for her thoughts, even when she didn't speak them. While he worked the post back in with a sledge, she stood nearby, pulling her shawl tighter against the wind. "What happens now?" she asked. "You didn't pause. We got through winter. And then?" He looked up at her, squinting through his sweat. "Spring comes. Snow melts. Life keeps moving." She nodded, biting the inside of her cheek. "That man Royce, he might come back." "He might." "You afraid?" "No." She waited. "I've been shot at, left for dead, gone half mad with loneliness," he said. "A man like that doesn't scare me." She stepped closer, snow crunching under her boots. "But this does." His eyes flicked up, and she saw the answer before he spoke. "Yes," he said. "You do." They rode back slow. The sun hovered pale behind the clouds, and the land was all white hushing distant pine. She watched him out of the corner of her eye, his posture, the way he glanced over to check the path for ice, the ease with which he took her hand when her boots slipped dismounting. That night she found him mending a saddle strap at the table. "I want to stay," she said, arms crossed over her chest. "Not just because I need to, because I choose to." He looked up. "I want that too," he said. "I need to hear it," she whispered. He set down the strap and came to her, stood inches away. "I want you here," he said, "not to fill a space, not to fix what was lost, just as you are." Her breath caught. She reached out, touched the place on his chest where his heartbeat met her palm. "We'll be a family," she said, "but a new kind, not the kind I had before." He smiled, just a flicker, but it warmed the whole room. "I don't want to be what you had before." Later that night, Hattie crowed beneath her new quilt, half asleep, and whispered, "Mama, is he ours now?" Mom brushed hair from her daughter's forehead. "He is if we're his." James, already dreaming, rolled into Ella's flannel shirt, which the man had given him for winter. And in the silence, something clicked into place. Not loud, not dramatic, just true. Outside, the snow fell soft as ash. Inside, they were warm. Spring came in slow drips, snow pulling back from the fence posts, ground waking in patches of mud and stubborn green. Birds returned first, then the smell of damp pine, then the ache of the earth remembering itself. They planted late but sure. Myrna and Eli worked side by side in the thawed rows. Her hands blistered again, but she welcomed the sting. James followed with a tin watering can, proud as a man twice his age, while Hattie marked each row with twine and careful knots, the way Eli had taught her. Myrna laughed more now. Not often, not loud, but real. Eli noticed every time. And he smiled more too, with his eyes in the corners of his mouth, as if each new day surprised him by staying. One afternoon he rode into town to buy salt and seed, and returned with a small wooden box. Said nothing, just set it on the table. Maren opened it slowly. Inside, resting on a square of muslin, was a gold ring. Nothing flashy, worn at the edge. She looked up at him. "It was my mother's," he said. "She didn't have much, but she gave this to my father, and he passed it to me. Said he'd know when it was time." Morin blinked. Her throat tightened. "I don't need a preacher," he added, "or papers. Just want you to wear it if you want to, so folks will know it's already true." She slid it on. It fit snug, like it had been waiting for her all along. They married a week later under the cottonwoods near the creek. Just them, the children, and the wind. Hattie wore wildflowers in her braid and stood beside her mother with proud, teary eyes. James held out his hand like he'd been born too. No music, no sermon. Just vows spoken plain, heart steady. Nothing borrowed but the sky. When the day cooled and the wind picked up, they walked back to the cabin together. A family not built on rescue, but on choice. Eli added 2 more rooms that summer. Said the kids needed space. Morin helped lay the floorboards. When James asked what would go in the empty room beside his, Eli just said, "Well, see." Morin didn't say anything, but later that night she stood barefoot in that room, hands pressed to her belly, and felt a quiet certainty take hold. They didn't need to speak it yet. Some things, she had learned, were best held gently. In town, folks looked at her different. Some with curiosity, some with quiet apology. The bank manager who once turned her away tipped his hat. The grocer called her by name again. None of it mattered much. She didn't need their kindness anymore. What mattered was that when the wind picked up and the land turned harsh, she was alone. When the sky broke open with rain, there was someone beside her to shoulder the storm. And at night, when the fire burned low and the cabin went still, she'd lie next to Eli, his breathing deep and even, and feel the pulse of something solid and lasting. Not a rescue, not a dream, just a life, built board by board, day by day. When she chose, the trail stretches far subscribe and dried it out.